I am joined today by communication expert Karen Laos. She is on a mission to help women get the tools to find their voice and lead with confidence. Welcome, Karen, to the new mid.
Thank you, Michelle.
Well, Karen, I cannot wait to dive in and start to talk about your expertise on speaking with confidence. But I have been listening to you a lot on Clubhouse and am blown away by all of your expertise, but how important it is to speak with confidence. And we don't really think about that. But before we dive into all of that, could you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. Oh, should I use my PPU model? So,
Sure. Yeah. And we'll be talking about the PPU model. So, yes.
okay, very good. Well, we'll talk about this there actually is a structure behind what I'm about to say. And so I am Karen Laos, originally from Minneapolis, but now I live in San Francisco and I've been here for the past 25 years, following a dream. Ever since I was in high school, I wanted to live here. So that was a very fun dream to fulfill. Professionally, throughout my years, I've been in corporate. That's my history. Started in HR, worked for the Gap, Wells Fargo, variety of companies that some people are familiar with. And for the past 14 years before COVID hit, I was working for a company called Decker Communications, which is where I really like to say I grew up professionally. And that's where I truly became an expert around communication in your messaging to make yourself memorable, but also in how you come across to be able to build more trust and credibility through your voice as well as your body language. And I took the leap last July, left corporate, and never looked back. I truly love what I do. And I hope you've experienced that, Michelle, in listening to me, because to me, it's frankly, it took me too long to find my own voice. So that's the personal story underneath this. And I realize I'm totally deviating from the PPU model, which we will talk about later. But I thought a little more context would be helpful in this case. But I do very much feel a passion to help other women because I'm 53 now. And it wasn't even that long ago that I would find myself in these corporate leadership meetings feeling intimidated sometimes. And I finally got to a point where I go, what is wrong? Like, this is unacceptable. Yeah, of course, you have to give yourself grace. But I remember thinking, why am I so hung up on it having to be perfect or what people think? And there were so many times that I didn't trust my gut. And that is the biggest piece of advice that I would give to anybody is to trust yourself and take into consideration what other people are saying around you, but ultimately to trust yourself in what you know to do best. So that is a little bit about me. And on a personal note, I am married and I do have two little fur baby kitties that I adore. And I truly am a follower of dreams. So I would say that that's from a personal standpoint. I really love to have a dream, make an action plan, and then make it happen.
Well, you keep talking about the PPUs. So I think we can start there actually, because first impressions are important.
Yes,
And we don't give a lot of thought to introducing ourselves.
you're
So,
right.
can you dive in and talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it really is amazing how often I will coach somebody and they'll tell me after, oh my gosh, that introduction, when you asked me to introduce myself, that totally threw me. And I think, oh my goodness, that is the one thing that we should for sure be ready with all the time. So I adopted a model that I learned from my past employer, Decker Communications. I want to give them full credit for a way that they do it. But I adopted it to PPU, which is a little bit different from them. And that is to say something personal, professional, and then unique. So if I were to do it in an abbreviated version, it might sound something like this. I'm Karen Laus. I'm originally from Minneapolis, but now I live in San Francisco. Professionally, I coach women over 40 who are wanting to overcome self doubt and speak with confidence. Something a little bit unique about me that not everybody knows is that because I love to follow my dreams, one of those was to live in Manhattan. And I did that for an entire month during my 50th birthday. So I say 50th birthday, but the month of my 50th birthday, and I had a blast. So that is a little bit about me. So
And
it's the
that
structure. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's really interesting. And to actually have it structured, like you were saying, and to think about, okay, what's unique about me that would leave an impression on people? And you said it very succinctly and not too long. You didn't keep going on and on. And that leads me to my next question is how many details are too many details? I've heard you talk about, not rambling on and on.
Yeah.
so so can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I like to joke that I'm a recovering rambler so that everybody knows that anything that I teach has actually been a challenge for me to learn. And that's also hopefully an encouragement to everybody that communication is a skill that you can learn. It's not as if we jump out of the womb like this for really anybody with our expertise. There's a skill that can be learned. And so, I want to come back just for a moment before I answer that, which is a bridge to what my answer is going to be. Why do we talk about the PPU, or why is that even a good thing? And because I continue to get feedback about it, but there's actually a specific reason, which is also helpful related to the rambling problem that a lot of us have. First of all, there's a structure. We need structure, our audience needs structure, and they will definitely hear our message better when we provide that for them. So, that rule of three really comes from journalism. What are the three things that I'm going to share? Or here are the three key points. That's why so many messages are crafted around that, because most of the time we can't, as human beings, really retain more than three things, or we start tuning out, or we're starting to wander in our brains. So that's why, as a speaker, having those three components can be very helpful, whether it's PPU or whether it's, hey, there's three things I want to share with you about me, or in the case of what else can we do with the rambling problem, it's really thinking about, first of all, two things I want to share. One is, what do you do when you notice it's happening? I always like to joke that think about the slow-mo videos where the words are out there, but you just want to take them back. Like, no, it's already out there. And so, one tip that I recommend that's worked really well for me and my clients is, number one, to pause. But then the second part of that could be, now that may be enough, just to pause to collect your thoughts. But the second part is to actually say verbally, and my point is this. That I personally have found so helpful, because not only does it help me, but it helps me externally process the thing that I'm about to do. And that is a forced accountability in a sense, like if we're really analyzing this. So that's where that can be very helpful to move you along. The other thing, though, to be proactive on it. So now thinking about, how do you avoid the rambling in the first place, which is, of course, probably what most of us would prefer. That is to start by thinking, what is the point? Whenever you're sharing something, before you start talking, think in your mind, what is my point? And that will help, because too often what we do is we just start talking. We don't really think about it. This is where I go back to, we have to start speaking with intention. And part of that also leads to speaking with punctuation, which is a partially other subject. So I'll hold that for a moment. But if we can think about, what is my intent here? What is my goal in this conversation? And we start thinking more like that. We start training our brain to focus on, okay, like right now I'm talking with Michelle on a podcast. What's actually needed for this podcast interview to be effective? To make your listeners understand what I'm saying, or to make sure I'm saying it in a way that they understand, that's also engaging. And hopefully, Michelle, to make you look good, that you had a good guest on your podcast. So, those are all things that I'm thinking in advance. How do I stay focused and audience based, essentially, rather than me focused, but always thinking about the audience? So, that's a partially another thing, too. But really thinking, what is my point? And how can I serve the audience? Those are essentially two questions that anybody could ask.
Well, something that is very apparent while you speak, and I think about it while I'm speaking to you, is, as you mentioned, punctuation. So Can you go into a little more detail about punctuation and how you are so precise on putting periods and not question marks?
Yes, I can. I thought you'd never ask, Michelle. You know I love this
I
one.
know. Well, you've helped me with it actually.
Oh,
So,
I'm so glad. That's great to hear. Well, this is something that I would consider an epidemic in our society for men and women, which is that we don't punctuate regularly. And specifically, within that punctuation, the epidemic is that most people say their name or in their introductions, it's one big run on sentence with maybe a comma occasionally. But more importantly, we don't say our names with conviction. So, in other words, with a period. I always tell people the one thing you should know is your name. So, I'll model this just so everybody can get it conceptually. But first, I will say, what is upspeak? Upspeak is when you say a statement, but you say it, you punctuate it like a question or a comma, when it really is intended to be a period. So, for example, if I say what people typically, how they typically introduce themselves is like this. Hi, I'm Karen Laos, and I'm originally from Minneapolis, but now I live in San Francisco. Versus, hi, I'm Karen Laos. I know I am. And as a matter of fact, I'm originally from Minneapolis, but now I live in San Francisco.
yes, there's
You
no question.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so it's really funny though, but most I shouldn't say funny. It's not really haha funny, but it's interesting funny. It's in what do you call it? I can't think of the right term for it right now. It makes me curious. That's what I think that it's a curious thing that we do. And yet, like anything, we have these habits. And because we don't have people really teaching this and modeling it, most of us do an intro like a run-on sentence. But when you
Right.
have someone yeah, like, but when you have someone that punctuates, it's so different. And my goal to help women in particular is to stand out. I wanna help women be different in a good way. We want people to be memorable. You want somebody to go, "Wow, when she speaks, there's something about it." And I think back to me having this experience on the receiving end with the very first coach I hired over 20 years ago. Her voicemail message was so different from anything I'd ever heard. And she said, "Hi, you've reached Michelle." Actually, her name was Michelle too. Now I think about it, that's funny. But she had these pauses after each one, and it made me truly stop in my tracks. Whereas most of us, when we have our outbound message, it's, "Hi, you've reached Karen, leave a message, blah, blah, blah." It almost sounds like a list of items or that I'm just trying to get it over with. So when you have someone that truly punctuates like that, it's so different. And all the while, also still having an engaging vocal tone, being conversational so you don't sound like a robot. And this is often what I notice happens sometimes, where even today, this happened on Clubhouse in one of my rooms. A woman came up and practiced saying her name. And then she tried it again because the first time she did the question mark. And then when she tried it again, she said, like this, I'll just model it with my name. I'm Karen Laus. She was so focused. And so I always tell people that when you're practicing something, it's like a sport or a musical instrument. You maybe have played golf before and you're really good at your game, or you play a musical instrument, and then you hire a coach, and then they tell you to shift something, and you've been used to playing it a certain way for so long it feels weird. So I always joke that sometimes we get worse before we get better. And in her case, like many people, we're so focused on saying it with a period that we get really serious and monotone. So I always try to remind people you can still say it friendly, like now say it with a smile and see how it comes across.
Well, it's interesting that you say that with a smile because I took a voiceover class when I was at CBS. I thought maybe one day I would be a voiceover person.
Yeah.
And my teacher was I can't remember her name right now, but she was a renowned voiceover coach. And she kept saying, well, first of all, she would have us speak with our hands up. which was interesting because of energy. And then
Yeah,
she would always tell us to speak with a smile. Smile as you're speaking. And
I
it
love
comes across. It really does. It's powerful. So that is leads me into body language. You've talked a lot about body language, and it's funny because growing up everyone could tell what kind of day I was having just by how they could see across the street, like if I was having a good day or a bad day. so so talk to us a little bit about body language and having confidence with our body language.
Sure. Well, very important. Number one thing that I would suggest is to stand or sit up tall, putting your shoulders back. Too often, especially as women, we hunch our shoulders or we make ourselves smaller when we really want to be expanding. Because if you, first of all, if you think about it, just thinking about how most of us were raised, little girls, we were taught to, cross your legs, keep your hands to yourself, keep yourself, yeah, just politely sitting there with your legs crossed. Versus, think about the way guys sit. They'll spread out their arms, they'll cross their legs. And I sometimes notice this for most of my career was in corporate. So these corporate group dinners we would have, it would be so interesting. You would see such a difference. And if you look at or just simply think about the research and how we come across that when people are bigger, they automatically come across with more power and confidence. And I don't necessarily mean your physical size, I mean the way that you carry yourself. So thinking about expanding your arms a little bit more, where sometimes I'll work with someone on gestures, for example, and they'll do just little ones like this. Like this feels like a bigger gesture. So for those of you that are watching this, you can see I'm using these little gestures. But think about expanding. Like maybe it's, hey, our financial results before versus the future where we're headed. Thinking about how could you illuminate your content with bigger gestures without coming across as forced. But this is also where we bring in the value of video recording. So you can see, it might feel weird to you. So many people say it feels really weird, Karen. You're asking me to do this big gesture and it feels weird. But then they see it and they go, oh, wow, I like that version of myself. So I'm never a fan of faking it. At the same time, it's important for each person to be the judge. I always tell people this is the one area I say don't trust yourself, trust the video. Because of the way we are with our habits, it's going to be really hard to really experience while we're doing it the way it truly is coming across on the outside.
You know what I love so much about what you're doing is us in midlife, we haven't looked at ourselves this way. We haven't
Mm,
intentionally thought, okay, how am I coming across? And it's great to do it now. It's
yes.
wonderful. And you talk about the three C's, and I love that it's three.
It's always going to be three.
The three C's to command a room. And
Mhm.
I think it's important for us to learn those, especially us women in midlife, no matter what we're doing, whether we are in corporate or we're starting our own business or we're at the PTA. But
Right.
I think, I'm also I'm thinking a lot about the stay-at-home mom. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I do have my own business now,
Mhm.
but a lot of times we feel, oh, we're not worthy, or oh, we're not corporate, or whatever that is. So I think it's important, no matter who you are or what you're doing, that you learn these three C's to command the room. So without any further ado, if you could tell us these three C's, there's that buildup.
Yes, the drum roll, the drum roll. All right. Well, the first C is credibility. Now, there's a variety of ways that we can essentially, I don't know if measure is the right word for credibility, but the way that we come across and people determines whether they think we're credible or not. And when I talk about this, I focus on the voice, how you're coming across with your vocal projection, as well as that vocal variety, thinking about having highs and lows in your pitch, as well as your tone, so that you come across essentially as the opposite of monotone. So you sound like you're actually interested in what you're talking about. That is really important. And we covered upspeak already. That's one of those same areas. And then the last one is the conversational tone. Try to ditch the script. Too often what happens is people prepare and they have these almost like printed out words on a page, and I would highly recommend 3 to 5 trigger words and use Post-its for your key points rather than trying to write something out because number 1, whenever we read, it doesn't sound natural. And number 2, what if you miss your spot? I've heard too often where this has also happened, where the person says, "Oh, I typed the whole thing out because I was so nervous and then I lost my place." And then we can get tripped up. So, very, very important to make sure you're conversational. So that's credibility.
I love that. I love that. So, how do we ask for a raise, or how do we ask someone to do something that we have a might be difficult to ask them to do that? How do we get them to buy in?
Sure. Can I say the other 2 C's first?
Oh, we didn't do the other 2
Just
C's.
in
I'm so
case.
sorry. I thought we did. Okay,
I
let's go
I re
back.
No, I realized I was talking yeah, because I thought if anybody's wondering, well, what are the other 2 C's? Credibility is one. The second one is clarity, and
Okay.
that's what we covered already around getting to the point to avoid rambling. And then the third one is around it's claim your power. That is to avoid using minimizing language or devaluing language that we often don't even realize we're doing, like the words just or little. For example, Michelle, I just want to share a little tip with you. And oftentimes when we say it like that, we also make ourselves smaller, almost like, I don't want to take up too much space. So I just want to share a little tip versus I want to share a tip with you, Michelle. It's such a different feel. But sometimes we are actually giving our power away without even realizing it. And then the other component of that is to stop apologizing when you don't need to apologize. And I would suggest replacing it, well, first for fun, say I'm sexy instead. Start training yourself to say that. And I say that in jest.
I love that. I've actually talked to my group about that. I'm like, "All right, ladies, we are no longer saying I'm sorry. We're saying I'm sexy."
Yes, love it. But then the 2 real phrases that I would recommend actually using, if you said them out loud to someone else, maybe "I'm sexy" to yourself, and then say things like, "Excuse me." If you bump into somebody at the grocery store or you accidentally interrupt somebody in a meeting and you didn't mean to, "Excuse me" is perfectly fine. And then the other one could be simply, "Thank you for understanding," or "Thanks for your patience." So those are a couple of terms there. But now we can get to your other question.
Yes, I am so sorry. I jumped ahead. So
That's
yes.
okay. No.
So it is important to the language we use,
Mm,
when we are asking for a raise or asking something that's a little more difficult.
mhm.
So what advice do you have for us on that?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would get clear yourself on what is it that you want, because one of the biggest problems with communication is that we're not clear. Sometimes we think we are, but we don't actually articulate it. And that's another thing that happens a lot where I will coach someone. This is why it's also great to have people recorded on video because sometimes someone will go, "Well, wait, no, I said it." And then we'll play it again and then they'll go, "Oh, oh, you're right, I didn't." So we don't often make a direct ask. So if the first advice would be figure out what it is that you want and are you able to ask it directly? So often people say things like, "Well, if you think I'd be a good fit, let me know." Or if you think, and in fact, I have a story for this that I'll digress for a moment because it's very much related to asking for what I wanted and it felt sensitive to me, but I didn't get what I wanted. And then there was a whole learning for it. So this was at a company where I was asked to be on the leadership team, and I was so excited. But I technically, even though it was a pretty small company, I had this title called senior manager. And I had been that for years because titles weren't really that important at this company. But when I was asked to be on the leadership team, I noted that everybody else on the team was a director level or above. So I said to my boss something like, so very passively. So what does this mean for me? Everybody's a director. And I was very passive, almost like this. Could you read my mind, please? She said something like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we'll have to figure all that out. I'm still trying to figure out all this stuff." So it was very much just, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. And not that she dismissed me, it was just that I didn't make a direct ask. Months later, I brought it up again, and yet I was just as passive. And then at my review, I was so disappointed when I didn't get promoted. And then I was thankfully we had a good relationship. But I remember her saying, "But wow, you seem like," she noticed that I seemed disappointed. And I said, "Well, I thought I've asked you twice about this." And she said, "Really?" So then we had this conversation. I had to look at myself. And so here's the learning. This is what I would suggest for anybody else: ask for what you want. If it would have been such a different experience if I had said, "I really want to be, I'm so honored that you're asking me to be on the team. I would like to be a director title before I hop on that team. What is that possible? And if it's not, what will it take me to get to that place? Because that's my goal. And I'd like to get there within 6 months. Do you think that's possible?" Notice how different that is. I'm actually taking ownership of what I want and I'm asking. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not rude about it. I'm just simply saying, "Here's what I'd like." And that was a massive learning for me. So I wanted to offer that to anybody else.
That's great. I wish I would have known all of this when I was in corporate, 15 years ago. I mean, 20, 30 years ago when I started out. This is so powerful, but it's better to learn it late than never, right?
Yes, exactly.
So that's,
Well,
thank you so much, Karen, for being here. And, I wanted to ask you if somebody is having a hard time getting started,
mhm.
like, okay, this sounds like really good advice. What would you suggest to them how to start?
Sure. The first thing really goes back to yourself and getting clear, what is one thing that you could do to practice? And I'm going to give an example. I want to come back for a moment on one other piece of advice that directly links to what we're talking about now. When before you had said, "What do you do when something is a little sensitive, like asking for a promotion or asking for something that maybe you feel uncomfortable asking?" The first thing you want to think about is who your audience is. What do they need? What do they care about? The more we can focus on our audience, the less we will be so fixated on ourself and our nervousness around the topic or just simply feeling uncomfortable with the subject. So think about, what does the audience need? And then the second part of that is really, what is required of me? What do I need to do to adjust for that particular listener? And a really easy thing is simply to start with the benefits for that person. What are they going to get? So if you're positioning yourself for a promotion, for example, what are they going to get? Or if you are an entrepreneur and you're wanting to introduce somebody to your product or service, well, how is it going to benefit them? So if we can start there, that's really helpful. Now, to your question specifically around, well, where do you start? What's one thing that you could do? So the first thing is simply to record yourself. That's not something most people wanna do, but I'll tell you, it is the best way to hear how you actually sound. And as you know, Michelle, so many people will go, "Oh my gosh, I hate my voice," or, "Oh, I don't sound like that." I hate to say it, but you probably do sound like that because I always laugh with people because I say, "Wouldn't you rather know how you're coming across and then you can adjust it if you need to?" But it's pretty hard to change tone of voice, although I understand it's possible. That's not my expertise, like accent modification and that kind of thing. But start with recording yourself, and then the harder part is to actually listen or watch it back. And then I would also suggest that when you're recording yourself, that you do it in a real environment rather than a mock environment. Now, it's better than nothing. If you, for example, like right now, I just said, "Oh, I'm going to do a minute video and then watch it back talking to myself." But if people can record a Zoom meeting or another situation where you are actually being in a real life scenario, then you get a much better read of how you truly are coming across in that scenario.
Well, Karen, this has been amazing. It's been wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
so and I love how you are helping people find their voice.
Thank you.
You know, it really is powerful, especially in midlife. We need to do this now. I mean, better late than never, as we were saying earlier.
Yes,
So how can people
exactly.
get in contact with you?
Yes, well, you can go to my website, which is karenlaos.com, and that's Laos, like the country. I also spend a lot of time on Instagram, and there my handle is Karen Laos Consulting. So that would stem anywhere from there is great. I also, though, keep forgetting this because I did this podcast and I laugh that I say I accidentally started a podcast. So I don't even think too much about it, but it's actually been really fun. And that started in January. So that one is called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laos. And the same name is my free Facebook group, Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laos. I would welcome anybody contacting me in either of those places.
Great. And I'll make sure to have it in the show notes as well, in the
Thank you.
details. Well, Karen, this has been so much fun.
Thank you. I'm so glad to finally meet you. I mean, it's
I
funny how
know.
face Zoom now feels like face to face, like in person.
I know this is sort of the new in person, right?
Yes, I know.
So
It's true.
funny. Oh my gosh. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being on the new mid.
You're so welcome, Michelle. Thank you too.